Welcome back. Good morning. Good week. We're going to learn Tractate Shabbos, third chapter, page 45. The third chapter is called Kira, and we'll start from the top. 45. Hachinami mistabodak the Rav ki Rabbi Yehuda Sfirle. The Gemara finds support for this answer. In fact, it seems reasonable to conclude that the Rav concurs with Rabbi Yehuda. What did he say? The Rav manichin neir al gabi deka b'Shabbos. We may place a burning lamp on a palm tree for the Shabbos. Ve'ein manichin neir al gabi deka b'Yom Tov. But we may not place a burning lamp on a palm tree for a festival. What's the difference between why? It says in number 1, it is prohibited by principle decree to ascend or make use of a tree on the Shabbos or festival, lest one forgetfully tear a branch of it in violation of the malacha of koitzer, ripping. Nevertheless, Rav teaches that we may leave a burning lamp on a tree before the Shabbos. They are concerned that one might remove the lamp from the tree, but when it comes to Yom Tov, since you're allowed to use the fire, you're allowed to use existing flame on Yom Tov, so there's a concern that you might climb the tree and touch the candle on Yom Tov. So on Shabbos you're allowed to leave a candle on the tree, but on Yom Tov you shouldn't be, because of this concern. So this fits well if you say that Rav concurs with Rabbi Yehuda. There's something that is muktzah during Ben Hashmoshes, meaning the twilight right at the beginning of Shabbos, remains muktzah for the entire day. I know the shani bin Shabbos Yom Tov. For that explains why Rav distinguishes between the Shabbos and the festival. But if you say that Rav concurs with Rabbi Shimon, that something that is muktzah during Ben Hashmoshes, during the twilight period, does not necessarily remain muktzah for the entire day. Mali Shabbos u'Mali Yom Tov. What is the difference between the Shabbos and festival? Clearly, then Rav concurs with the Rabbi Yehuda, as we stated above. It says number 3. It is ought to be forbidden to leave a burning lamp on a tree on the Shabbos as well as on Yom Tov, since even on the Shabbos the lamp will no longer be muktzah when the flame goes out, and one might then be tempted to remove it from the tree. So there's still a concern that he might move it from the tree, even if it's Shabbos, because once the candle is out, he might climb the tree. It says in 3, we are correct in saying that Rav's view that if a bed had money on it during Ben Hashmoshes, it may not be moved the entire Shabbos, follows Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It seems somewhat superfluous for the Gemara to prove that Rav concurs with Rabbi Yehuda, as Rav's initial ruling above. If a bed was designated and once used for storing money, it becomes muktzah. It itself not considered the bed muktzah, is itself not considered the bed muktzah since it is fit for permissible functions. Why then was it necessary to bring additional proof that in the latter part of the ruling Rav concurs with Rabbi Yehuda? Tosfos answered that the Gemara needed to prove that Rav concurs with Rabbi Yehuda even concerning the principle that since something is muktzah during Ben Hashmoshes, it remains muktzah for the entire day. Rabbi Yehuda Svirale, Rav ki Rabbi Yehuda Svirale, Rabbi Menashe Rav. But does really Rav agrees with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Menashe Rav, they inquired of Rav, they asked Rav a question. What is the law with respect to moving a Chanukah menorah away from where it may be seen by the Chanukah, by the Chaberin on the Shabbos after the flames have gone out? What is the Chaberin? where the Chaberin or Chaborin were a violent people who for a time ruled Babylonia, this Chaborin, and together with the Persians, and they forbade kindling the Hanukkah light. So you're allowed to remove it from the. Are you allowed to remove this light out of concern that they might come, they might see you? Other explains that Hanukkah coincided with a festival on which they would not allow lights to be kindled anywhere except at their temples. So, nevertheless, if there was no Chaborin in this violent bunch, who was not in the vicinity at the time for lighting, people would sometimes light the menorahs at the doors of the courtyard. It should optimally be done, and would bring them in after light went out, so that any passing Chaborim would not realize that their decree had been violated. So they inquired of Rav whether it would be permitted to move the menorah on the Shabbos after the lights went out. So the Gemara says, "V'amar lei shu omar lu shapir dam." And Rav replied, "It is proper to do so." Evidently, Rav does not consider the menorah muktzeh after the flame goes out. He does not concur with Rav Yehuda, even though it's Shabbos. The light went out. He says, "Yeah, you can move the menorah." The Gemara says you can bring a proof from there. Over there, it's Shas Atchak. It's a time of need. It's emergency. You don't want the Chaborim to catch you, this violent crowd. So the Omar Alei Rav Kana Rav Ashi Rav Hachi Ilcheto. It is really the law, question mark, or this is just for the time of a time of emergency. Amar Lu Kedai Rabbi Shimon Esmach Shat Chak. Rabbi Shimon is sufficiently worthy to be relied upon as an authority in a time of emergency. Rab's response implies that he ordinarily follows the view of Rabbi Yehuda. This became a statement in other things as well, that it's Rabbi Shimon is worthwhile, his merits, his greatness is so immense that you can rely on him in the time of need in general concepts, not just in the specific inyan. The specific concept. So they asked Rish Lakish inquired of Rabbi Yochanan, what is Rabbi Shimon's opinion concerning wheat that was planted in the ground and eggs that were placed under a hen to incubate? He lays le Rabbi Shimon muktzeh. Shall we say that when does Rabbi Shimon not reply the law of muktzeh to a useful item? Is only regarding a situation where one was not actively set it aside from being used. But in a situation where one actively set it aside, Rabbi Shimon applies the law of muktzeh to it. Or perhaps there's no difference between items that were actively set aside and those that were passively unintended for use. Rabbi Shimon does not apply the law of muktzeh to any useful item. Amar ein muktzeh Rabbi Shimon, nothing that is useful is muktzeh according to Rabbi Shimon. On the basis of having been set aside doesn't make it muktzeh. Ela shemen shebeneir b'shor shudelek, except oil that in a lamp while it is burning, which is muktzeh oil v'uktzol lemitzvah. So since it was set aside for the mitzvah of Shabbos candles. In 45:8:2, uktzol isuroi and was set aside for duration of its prohibition. V'leis leuktzol mitzvah. Does Rabbi Shimon not recognize the concept of set aside for mitzvah? Was not set aside account, but was not set aside on account of a prohibition. If one covered the sukkah in accordance with its law, he did it properly. And he decorated with colored cloth, embroidered linens, he hung in it nuts, pitchers, almonds, pomegranates, clusters of grapes, wreath of grain, glass bottles of wine, oil, and fine flour. Also, and he is prohibited to use them. Until the night following the last day of the festival. But if he made the stipulation about them, everything follows his stipulation. In absence of stipulation, however, it is prohibited to use them because they are muktzeh. Since the only basis for considering them muktzeh is that they were designated for the mitzvah of sukkah, it is obvious that the designation for a mitzvah is itself sufficient to make something muktzeh. How do we know that's opinion of Rabbi Shimon? We may not detach wood from a hut on a festival, except from what adjoins it. Rabbi Shimon permits it. Obviously, that's his opinion. Here we go. He's permitting it. And all agree about the sukkah during the sukkah festival that its wood is prohibited. And if he made the stipulation about it before the festival, if it no, everything follows his stipulation. For since it was set aside for its mitzvah when it comes to oil in a Shabbos lamp, since it was set aside for its mitzvah, it was set aside for the duration of the prohibition of terminating the mitzvah. For example, for as long as the lamp burns. Nothing useful is muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon, except except when it comes to a candle while it is burning. Since it was set aside for a mitzvah, it was set aside only for the duration of the prohibition of terminating the mitzvah. Having established, Rabbi Shimon does not consider any useful item muktzah on the basis of having been set aside, except that which was set aside for mitzvah. The Gemara turns to another type of item that Rabbi Shimon concedes is muktzah. So if it's set aside, it's not muktzah. If it's set aside for mitzvah, then it's muktzah for Rabbi Shimon. Now we'll have another case. There's no food that is muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon on the basis of having been set aside, except for dried figs and raisins that were set aside to dry before the advent of the Shabbos and have not yet dried out completely. Rabbi Shimon concedes that these are not muktzah since they are unfit for consumption. But are other things rendered muktzah by being set aside according to Rabbi Shimon? Question mark. If someone was eating figs and left over some, and he took them up to the roof to make dried figs out of them, and or if he was eating grapes and he left over some, so he brought them to the roof to make them raisins out of them. He may not eat them unless he designated them for use before the Shabbos. So regarding peaches and quinces, and all other types of fruits. Mani, whose opinion is this? The Gemara says, if you say for even in a case where one did not actively set something aside but merely failed to prepare it for Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda considers it muktzeh. In a case where he set it aside with his hands, how much more so that it's muktzeh? So whether it is not clear that the Bryce is expressing the view of Rabbi Shimon And it teaches that according to Rabbi Shimon, all fruits are rendered muktzeh by being put out to dry, not only raisins and grapes. Like Gemara says, actually, the Brisa expresses the view of Rabbi Yehuda, and he found it necessary to teach that the fruits are muktzeh even though the person had been eating them and then decided to put the remainder out to dry. I might think because he continues to eat, he's eating. He should not have explicitly prepared the remainder of the fruits for Shabbos use, and even that which he puts out to dry should not be rendered muktzeh. Kamashmalan, the Rabbi Yehuda therefore informs us, since the person brought them up on the roof to dry, he has taken his mind off them and does not plan to use them on the Shabbos. Consequently, they are muktzeh even though he was previously eating them. Having established that according to Rabbi Shimon, even an item that was actively set aside is not muktzeh, if it was fit for use at the onset of the Shabbos, the Gemara considers the opposite case, and an item that was unfit for use at the onset of the Shabbos, but was never actively set aside. Shimon bar Rabbi inquired of Rabbi, Betzi elei temoro, Rabbi Shimon Mao. What is the law concerning eating unripe dates on the Shabbos or festival according to Rabbi Shimon? Unripe dates. Only thing that is muktzeh according to Rabbi Shimon is dried figs, or figs that are left to dry, and grapes that are left to dry to make them raisins. And Rabbi does not subscribe to the broad application of muktzeh, question mark. We may not water and slaughter range animals on a festival. Aval mashkin v'sheichatin es habaises, but we may water and slaughter domestic animals. V'atanyo elo and boas, which one are called range animals? Today there's a lot of free range animals. So what is considered range animals and what considered domestic? Any animals that go out during Pesach season now and graze in the pasture and then return to settlement during the first rains. Bices, these are still called domestic animals, even though they are like 3-4 months out there or 5 months out there. Any animals and
that go out.
Now 1 second. But what is considered midborios? What is considered range animals? If they live on Pesach and they come back on the in the winter, that's considered range animals. Now, what is considered domestic animals? Any animals that go out to pasture beyond the tchum of a settled area, they go out of a settled area and they come back to a settled area, but come back to spend the night within the tchum, within the settled area. So Rabbi according to Rabbi, both descriptions of animals, those that live after Pesach and they stay there until the rainy season, and those who leave the settled area and come back at night, they're all considered bices, they're all considered domestic animals. So what is range animals according to him? If they graze in pasture, and they do not return to settlement, they never come back, either in the summer or in the winter. Range animals are muktzeh only according to Rabbi Yehuda. Sheikh the Munyantov, since Rabbi provides a definition for range animals, he evidently follows Rabbi Yehuda view regarding muktzeh and not Rabbi Shimon view. If you prefer say, these range animals are analogies to dried figs and raisins. Why? Because they are out of your mind. You're not thinking about them. They're away. Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi posed this inquiry to Rabbi to clarify the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi responded in kind. But the Rebbe himself does not subscribe to this view. Rather, he concurs with Rabbi Yehuda's broad application of muktzah. Or Rebbe said his definition of range animals according to the opinion of the rabbis. The Tanakama, he meant as follows. And he meant to say, Rebbe meant to say this. For me, I do not apply muktzah at all, except in the case of dried figs and raisins. Hence, I maintain that range animals are not muktzah. Ledidchu, but according to you who apply muktzah broadly, oidu limias, at least agree with me, concede to me. If animals go out to graze in pasture during the Pesach season, return during the rainy season, first rains, the Vaisus knew that they are considered domestic. The rabbis didn't agree with them. They said these are not called domestic animals, these are called midborius, range animals. Omar Rabbo Baba Chana are going to see a lengthy discussion about whether Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon concerning muktzah. They said that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon concerning muktzah. What did he say concerning muktzah? They, in reference to the members of the academy, since Rabbi Yochanan repeated their opinion, it would seem he concurs with it. Okay, let's see. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say this? That halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, the laws of muktzah. But a certain Keruyan elder, and some say it was a Syrian elder.
Saruyan, I don't know.
Saruyan.
I don't know. Okay, someplace, whatever.
Yeah, name of a place. So, what is the law with regard to moving a portable chicken coop on the Shabbos? Chicken coops, some of them are portable, so you can drag them from one place to another.
Yeah.
Farmers use it for fertilization. Sometimes they use it for the birds to have new feed.
Yeah, feed, yeah.
Yeah, so different reasons. So there's portable ones. The question is, are you allowed to move it on Shabbos? Also, Rabbi Yochanan replied, it is made for any purpose other than to house chickens. Since it is obviously not, it is muktzah. There's no other purpose you can use it. Rabbi Yochanan's response implies that he concurs with Rabbi Yehuda.
You know, if they're empty, if the coops are empty, you can use it for storage, but that's still muktzah.
You can also use the plywood and the wood and the screen for other things. But you can use it as a trap. You can use it, but
It's still
what's its purpose?
rest, not negate the Shabbos.
So it says here in the case of the chicken coop, what are we dealing with? It is a case where there is a coop, in the coop, a chick that died on the Shabbos. Since the coop is now base to the dead chick, Ibn Mishum would agree that it is muktzah. The solution assumes that a dead chick is indeed muktzah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara points out that this is not universally accepted. Rabbi Shimon concedes, agrees that Rabbi Yehuda, agreed to Rabbi Yehuda, the healthy animals which died on the Shabbos are prohibited. Rabbi Shimon disagreed. Even in regard to healthy animals that died on the Shabbos, holding that they are permitted. What is there to say since a chick that died on the Shabbos is not muktzah? How shall we resolve Yochanan's statement that a chicken coop is muktzah? It is a case where there is newly laid egg in the chicken coop. Since the egg was laid on the Shabbos, it qualifies as noila, that something was born on Shabbos, created on Shabbos, which is muktzah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. Consequently, the coop is a base to muktzah. But if you subscribe to the laws of muktzah, you subscribe to the laws of noilod, and vice versa, of a new birth, a new creation, which is forbidden to move on Shabbos Elesel, Muktzah Elesel Noilod. But the one who does not subscribe to the broad application of Muktzah, i.e. Rabbi Shimon, does not subscribe to the prohibition of Noilod. According to Rav Nachman's interpretation of Rabbi Shimon's opinion, why should a chicken coop be Muktzah? The Isbe Beitza Sefoyach. We are dealing with a case where there is in the coop an unhatched egg containing a chick. Such an egg is certainly muktzah, and consequently the coop is a base to muktzah. The previous discussion was based on the presumption that Rabbi Yochanan concurs with Rabbi Shimon. In accordance with the halachic ruling, Rabbi Yochanan cited the halacha of Rabbi Shimon. A further teaching, however, shed new light on Rabbi Yochanan's view. When Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Yosef, arrived from Eretz Yisrael, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. And he added, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Omar halacha Rabbi Shimon. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is the one that said the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosef said, I know Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan must have meant when he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halacha Rabbi Shimon, velei lo isvir alei. They said the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. He meant that they, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan's other colleagues, said that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Yochanan himself does not concur with Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan ruling above that a chicken coop is muktzah pertains even to a coop that does not contain an unhatched embryo, in accordance to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yosef, do you not realize all along that Rabbi Yochanan concurs with Rabbi Yehuda? But there was once an incident in which Rabbi Abba and Rav Asi once arrived at the home of Rabbi Abba Haifa of Haifa or Haifa on the Shabbos, and a candelabra fell on Rabbi Asi's cloak, and he did not move it, since he considered it muktzah. My timer, what is the reason that he considered muktzah? It is not because that Rabbi Asi was a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan concurs with Rabbi Yehuda, who subscribes to a broad application of muktzah and considers a lamp muktzah even after it has gone out. It was evident even before Yitzchak report that Rabbi Yochanan concurs with Rabbi Yehuda. Amar le menauto ko'omar, you are citing an incident involving a candelabra as a proof. Menauto shani, candelabra is different than a lamp, and is muktzah even according to Rabbi Shimon. Rish Lakish ruled while in Tzidon. He tells a lightweight candelabra that can be moved with one hand may be moved on the Shabbos. But if you have to remove it with two hands because of its heaviness, then it's also Rabbi Yochanan Omar Rabbi Shimon. We have no allowance. Rabbi Yochanan said, we have no allowance for moving any lighting implement on the Shabbos except for a used lamp, in accordance with the view of Rabbi Shimon. But as for a candelabra, whether it can be moved with one hand or must be moved with two hands, it may not be moved on the Shabbos. While Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan dispute the status of lightweight candelabras, they both agree that the heavy candelabras are muktzah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Asi's reluctance to move the falling candelabra does not indicate that he and his father or his teacher Rabbi Yochanan follow Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. I was therefore unaware that Rabbi Yochanan does follow it until I heard Rabbi Yitzchak report that he follows Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Gemara now seeks to ascertain the reason for the special status of candelabras. What's so special about these candelabras? Why is it particularly forbidden to move candelabras? The Rabbi because a person designates a place for the candelabra. Abai challenges to explain, but considers the case of a canopy of a bridal bed, the odom kivalom for which a person designates a place. Shmuel said in the name of Bichia, kilas chasonim mutar in toitol mutar lefarko b'Shabbos, that this canopy you're allowed to move on Shabbos. The canopy of a bridal may be spread open and may be taken down on the Shabbos. Even something for which one designates a place is not muktzah. It says in number 1, Shmuel teaches that since this canopy is not horizontal but slanting and is less than a tefach wide at its peak, it is not the type of tent whose erection and demolition are prohibited on the Shabbos. At any rate, we'll learn from Shmuel's ruling that the canopy is not muktzeh, even though one designates a place for it. Perforce, one does not mean to set it aside from Shabbos use. Welcome to you. We'll continue with the Tractate Sota shortly.